Hey there, folks.
Hey there. This is Avery.
This is Rita.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we talk about women
some other folks
that you've probably never heard of.
but you should have.
And now you will.
Bam.
Nailed
and
it.
we're back.
We're back. Aren't you so excited to hear us? It's been a tough road trying to get here.
Yes, it has. And a lot of shit has happened.
First off, it is still 80 motherfucking degrees here.
I love it.
And I hate it.
You do?
Yes. Partially because we're recording right now in the morning. Thankfully, the mornings are cool. But if we were trying to do this an hour from now, this room would be a sauna.
True.
Which leads me to an update. We are going to be this season trying out a new studio.
Yes. And it's not very far from us. It is part of the Spokane Public Library.
Yes. We had intended on having our first episode recorded there, but Rita was sick.
Yeah, if you can hear a little bit, it's still lingering just a little bit.
For both of us. I got COVID again for the second time. Obviously, much different from my first time, which was literal hell. Thought I was going to die. This one was a lot easier and better, but I still have this weird throat thing where I kind of cough sometimes. It's always a little bit I don't know. Don't love it.
Yeah.
But then literally the very next week. So this is 3 weeks late because we had intended on recording 3 weeks ago. But that was not in the cards for us.
No. Sick and then okay.
Yes.
Ball rolling.
Yes. And so we missed our window to record in the new studio. So it looks like probably episode 3 will be our first one in the new studio, and we will definitely let you know. And we're really excited to try it out. And the library is very excited to have us host us there. So
I know it's going to be kind of fancy.
it is. It's really fancy. It's very cool. We'll take some photos. We'll share them on our social media, and it should be great.
All right. Do you want to go first for an update of what we've been up to, or me?
My update's pretty quick and not too much to it. I am 6 months on testosterone. My hormone levels are really fucking weird though, and that's been a bit of a bummer for me. So my pre-T levels were in the normal range for a biological woman, like a female, for testosterone. And then they were below normal for estrogen, which was very funny. And I told you guys all about that on the show. So I went on T, and 3 months in, when I got my first set of results back, my testosterone was then in the normal range for a cis man, like a biologically born man, assigned male at birth. And then my estrogen was also at the regular level of a person assigned female at birth. Suddenly.
Oh, God.
I was like, what in the fucking world? But whatever, testosterone was high. That's what I cared about the most. Then I got my 6 month results, and my estrogen is once again below normal level for assigned female at birth, which is fine. Don't care. Give zero shits. But my testosterone level is now half of what it was
Oh my gosh.
at 3 months.
Crazy.
And I don't know why. And my doctor's like, I don't know.
Oh, God.
Hormones are weird.
Yeah, you don't want the hands in the air emoji.
Shrug.
Yes.
Yeah, no, she's very much like, I don't know, bodies are weird. It depends on the time of day, which arm you took it from, where are you at in your cycle, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, I'm a person who needs answers.
Yeah, definitely.
And shrugs are not answers. So I'm feeling a little bit like, what's happening? I've had some really great improvement in my muscle growth.
Yeah, your physicality is, you look fine.
Looking good. I got a sweet little stash happening, which I don't remember if I told y'all that I was going to buy myself a shaver, an electric shaver.
Yeah.
And I did, and it was bad. I hated it.
What was bad about it?
Shaving in general, the worst thing I've ever done.
Oh, God.
I mean, there's a reason I don't shave any part of my body and haven't for 15 years. I don't like the naked mole rat feeling. I just don't like it. And having it on my face.
Why am I 10 degrees colder?
On my face, I was just like, this is awful. And immediately I had new acne.
Oh, no.
And I was like, well, this I don't love either. And I just didn't like it. I was like, this is not a thing I want to do. And also, like, I'm kind of into the idea of growing a little bit of facial hair, so like I'm not opposed to having it, but I just don't like it when it starts to curl into my mouth.
Oh god.
And I'm like eating hair.
I've heard that from people with mustaches where they say like they know when it's time to trim because they're like, I could touch it with my tongue.
Oh yeah, it'll start hitting the corners especially. So I'll be like sitting at my desk and I'll just like lick the corners of my mouth and be like, that's hairy. So I have a beard trimmer, so I just was like, I'll try this. And that I'm into.
Oh, okay.
Like
Awesome.
a good beard trimmer. So we're going to stick with a beard trimmer. We are not going to shave. Shaving is not for me. Not unless I absolutely need it.
Oh,
Not for me. So yeah, like that's where I'm at on my journey as far as testosterone is concerned. I also had like a lot of acne, and I'm on an antibiotic right now to try to address it. And it's working. My face looks a lot better than it did.
Yeah, your skin looks great.
A week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, when I was like, wow.
I hate when those happen where you just like blow up and you're like, I don't want to see people right now.
And it was just constant. It was like every day there'd be a new, and they were cystic ones. So they were like the ones that are really hard and red, and they just never go away.
Mm-hmm.
They just stay purple for like the rest of your life. That's what I was going through. So it's better now. I feel good. I'm just like confused about my hormone levels and what's going on.
Hopefully we'll get some answers on that one.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And your update.
I moved out of your house.
This is true.
37-year-old roommate moved out. Yeah, so I think we had mentioned last season that we were living together because me and my ex-husband split up, and Avery and Abby graciously let me peter around their house, and it was really nice. It was really, I think like the biggest thing was like I'm super grateful that I have friends that were willing to do that, give me a home. Like that's something you can't find every day. And then two, it was like really cool to just see an example of like a functioning relationship. It was really cool to like witness your love for each other, and
cool.
also like how you peck at each other. And like you would leave the room and Abby's like blah blah blah, and then Abby would leave the room and you'd be like blah blah blah. And it was like I was just sitting there with popcorn, just like.
Yes, we have been together for a long time.
But it was just nice to see like, but it's both of you, and it was really nice to see both of you together and see how your relationship ticks. It was a nice little window, and I really respect it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and it was nice. Abby's an amazing cook, and I got to eat some really good food.
It's true.
Yeah. Anyway, so I moved out. I think I had mentioned I had started seeing someone last season, and me and him moved in together. We got a place. It's really nice to have my own space again. It's a really cute apartment. We still have boxes. Like, we need to get on it. It's hard when you work all the time and then you just like stare at the box and you're like, I know I should go through that. But I listened to, I bought Anthony Bourdain's book, Kitchen Confidential. And
I love that book.
I've been audiobooking it while I go through boxes. I'm like, I'm going to treat myself while I'm actually physically doing something. That's been great. Work is always work. The kiddo turned 14. Wild.
Just absolutely blows my mind that kid is like a fully fledged teenager.
Like next year is like cars.
Well, no.
Well,
not
like,
really.
Isn't it permit time?
No.
15?
No, Washington has like wild things. Like they have to. Most of my students don't end up getting their licenses until they're 17.
Okay.
Because the way Washington law works has to do with like you have to take driver's ed, and then you have to have 100 hours documented of driving with an adult driver, and then you can take the test. So like by the time they've done all of that, it's usually like they'll get their permit at 16 usually, but they don't they're allowed to get permits at 15. But from what I have seen amongst my students, they're not really getting them until they're 16, and then their license is at 17. A lot of my students anyway. But because like the driver's ed course is a lot of time. And so students who are in sports, forget about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Doesn't driver's ed take like 3 months?
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
every, like, gosh, what did one of my students just tell me? It was like they couldn't, because they can no longer participate in GSA because they are in driver's ed until like 5:30 or 6 at night.
Oof, I hated driver's ed.
Yeah, and I remember driver's ed, and it was like really a lot shorter than, and ours was in like June.
We did it over the summer.
Yeah, we did ours over the summer, and these kids are doing them during the year.
Oh, wow.
So
that would be hard.
It is hard. They're really jam-packed. Anyway, that's off the topic. But
yeah, so it's really nice to have him in my space too. We're starting to split time between him and his father and I. So it's been really nice to have him back in the house and around. He's very much a teenager right now, and I love it. He's a little annoying sometimes, but I love having him around.
Yeah, I'm glad he's able to be in a space with you.
Yeah. It's going well. It was definitely a process. It took a while. I'm really glad to like have all my stuff in one place, because I would have stuff like in a backpack and then at my boyfriend's house and then here at this house, and then I had clothes at work. I never knew where anything was. I had to buy like 3 bags of makeup and keep them in random places so that I could always have a bag of makeup.
Yeah, and your schedule has been pretty hectic too.
Yeah.
The restaurant that Rita works at is opening a second location.
We are, which is another big step. Like that's another baby. So we're in the process of, like, honestly, like we met with an architect. Plan is done, submitted with the city. We're starting to apply for liquor permits, things like that. Things are getting delivered, refrigeration equipment. So it's like happening.
It's happening.
So things are about to get a lot thicker.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you're doing a lot, but it seems like you're a little overwhelmed at times.
Oh, yeah.
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 That's not surprising, is it?
No. Yeah, but hopefully, I'm learning when to say no, which is good. I did one today. So
which is good.
Which is very good.
Or you wouldn't be hearing us right now.
True story.
So are you ready for the first person of the season?
I am.
So, yeah, by the way, this is our 4th season. If you are just tuning in, welcome. This is how we are all the time.
Sometimes we're a little loopier. I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes we don't have it as together as we do today, which is surprising because it's the first episode of the season.
I know. I felt like it would be a little weirder, but
we just went right back into the groove.
Let's just break something really quick and get it over
with.
with.
Let's chop something. Make some noise.
All right. So this person that I'm talking about, you might know. It's someone I've been wanting to do for a while. I've just put it off, but do you know who Boudica is?
I do.
Okay. I figured you would.
Mathematician? No. She's on my list, which is why I know. She's on my list of people.
She is a Celtic warrior woman.
That's right. I had like a list of like kings and queens and princesses and whatever, and that's where she's from.
Was on there.
That's where she's from.
I've been wanting to do her since I did Hypatia. That Hypatia was the philosopher, mathematician, astrologer, woman extraordinaire. There was my sister-in-law who, after she heard the episode of Hypatia, was like, you need to do Boudica. And then I had a regular of mine who listened to the Hypatia episode and was like, you should do Boudica. So shout out to Andrea and Matt. We're doing Boudica.
Yay, Boudica.
I did hesitate to include her because her history is a little blurry because she is so far in the past. But I found an excellent source of research. Shout out to Professor Caitlin Gillespie, who wrote the book Boudica, Warrior Woman of Roman Britain. Pretty much my primary source. To start off, too, I'm going to preface that the reason why it was difficult to piece things together for Boudica's story, she was kind of like Hypatia. She was erased from texts, and she was erased for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so when the story was eventually rediscovered and retold, some of the translation from her ancient language, it doesn't quite translate to Latin or to Greek to even English. So it's really hard for some of the story to kind of make sense, I guess. And also, there is a bit of violence. I am going to trigger warning this episode. There's a little bit, I'm not going to go into heavy details with it, but there is violence and there is sexual assault.
Always, right?
Right. And talking about like the translation of her language, for example, even her name was gotten wrong for a while. She was called Boudica at first, and it was discovered later the proper pronunciation of her name was Boudica. There are two main literary sources that are who brought Boudica's story to light. The first one is Tacitus, who was a senator and a historian in the early Roman Empire. He worked in the 1st and 2nd century CE in Latin. And then there was Cassius Dio, which is a wonderful name.
Yeah.
He was another Roman statesman, historian, and he started writing about Boudica 100 years after Tacitus. So I'm pulling information from both of these threads of information. So Boudica was born around 30 AD, and at the age of 18, so this is like, she just jumps. She was born, then she got married, which we've seen a lot.
Yeah.
She was married to, I'm going to fuck this up, Prasutagus.
Sure.
Sounds like a sneeze.
Yeah. Or disease.
Prasutagus. He was the king of the Iceni tribe of modern-day East Anglia, and the two ended up having 2 daughters together. One thing that Professor Catlin said, I'm going to stop using the word tribe, because she said that the word tribe kind of has a connotation for other cultures that doesn't really match with the Celtic cultures. She said, but there's also just in their language, there was no other word for like groups of peoples. So she likes to just refer to what they called themselves, like the Iceni or the Boudicas, things like that. So instead of calling them tribes, I'm just going to refer to what they called themselves.
Okay, like their actual name.
Yes. And at this time, East Anglia, which is now East England, had many different groups of people, each building their own townships, cultivating their own lands. Boudica's people, the Iceni, were very well off. They were a well-established group of people. They were skilled at pottery. They were really good at farming. They imported silver, creating like works of art, weapons, jewelry. One of the main things that they were known for was horse trapping. And horses were very important to them. It was a very important resource. And with that, it led them to building these really amazing and elaborate warrior chariots. Both men and women were trained in warfare and how to use these chariots as well. And a lot of the artifacts found from the Iceni people were pieces of these chariots, horse bits, silver coins, pieces of jewelry. And a lot of these artifacts were found buried because they were intentionally buried. It was because during Boudica's time, her people were conquered and taken over by the Romans.
So you'll probably already answer this, but was that stuff buried intentionally by Boudica's people or by the people who are conquering them?
It was buried by Boudica's people.
Okay, so they were trying to hide it from their conquerors.
Yes. They began to bury their wealth because they were afraid the Romans were going to seize it, because the Romans were seizing everything.
Yeah, absolutely they would.
So under the rule of the Romans, they began to get taxed super heavily. A lot of their men were forced in order to fight for the Roman army against their will. For Boudica, it's far more personal. And this is where a bit of the warning comes in. Her husband had been, in a way, like playing ball with the Romans. He was, other groups of people were forced to submit, but where his territory landed and his position, they allowed him to keep his power and forced him to be an ally for the Roman army. He was keeping the peace and for his people and for his family, for his land. And he started bending to the oppression. He was just like trying not to make waves. He's like trying to just survive. And he ends up thinking in his mind that he's going to save his land for his family, for his daughters, and be able to still have some kind of home for them. Well, he ends up passing away. He has no son. So the Romans see that as a play to take Boudica's throne. They decide to seize the Iceni people. They seize all their land. They seize all their goods. And they seize all their people. And to make an example, they publicly display Boudica and they beat her.
Ugh. Gross.
They take her throne and then they rape her daughters.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Oh, that got ugly.
And then they enslaved all her relatives.
Oh, God. This is bad on bad on bad.
So she's publicly humiliated. Her daughters are assaulted. She's enraged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beyond. And
to put it mildly.
Mildly. And so is everyone else, because her family is not the only family that they're doing this to.
Right.
The overwhelming brutality her and her family and the other families are suffering just puts fuel on the fire. And she gathers these groups of people and she says, we need to plan a revolt. And Boudica arranges for the people to gather. And in the gathering, she speaks to them. And in Cassius Dio's writings, his writings are a little bit more grandiose, and Tacitus is a little bit more kind of down-to-earth factual.
Yeah.
Cassius seems to want to paint this really big poem of a story.
Yeah, he's interested in writing an epic. This other guy's like, I'm recording facts.
Yes, very much so. So Cassius says that she has this big, powerful, booming voice. She's standing there in her long robes. She's got a gold torque around her throat, which is like a gold band that a lot of warriors wear.
Yeah.
I think you've probably seen it in paintings and things like that.
Yeah, as soon as you said like a gold band around her neck, I was like, oh, I think I know what that is. It's like almost like a collar.
Yes, and it's a sign of nobility, too. He said her hair looked like fire as she yelled at the crowd. So she has really long, fiery red hair. And she yelled to the crowd, I regard you all as my kinspeople, since we inhabit the same island, since we are all called by the same name. I am fighting as someone like you who has lost their freedom. I am fighting for my bruised body. The gods will grant us revenge we desire. Think of how many of us are fighting and why. Then you will win this battle or die. That is what I, as a woman, plan to do. Let the men live as slaves. If they want, I won't.
Ooh, that's like some Braveheart shit.
Yeah. And
I want this movie.
Right?
I want this scene.
She also starts to really diss on the Romans. She describes how the Iceni people know the land, how they can use it to their advantage. She called the Romans weak, who could not even stand the cold. They can't stand the outdoors. And to quote Professor Gillespie, she says, Boudica said, oh, look at them with their fancy, like, bathing every day and eating bread. Like things of luxury.
Such a read.
She ends her speech by saying, let us show them that they are hares and foxes who are trying to fight against dogs and wolves.
Ooh.
I know. I liked that a lot.
Yeah.
So everyone decides to combine forces, and Boudica holds a ceremony, for lack of better translation of the word. She makes a sacrifice to a goddess named Andraste. I don't know what the sacrifice was. I don't know if it was a human or if it was an animal. So we'll just say sacrifice.
All right. Or it could be like in the case of the ancient Mayans, which I learned about, they did bloodletting.
Ooh, so no one actually really had to die?
Yeah, they would. So they had been like cutting their hands open and then they couldn't get water. So they would cut whole fingers off and then they still weren't getting enough rain. So they would cut whole hands off.
Oh my gosh.
And then it was after that they decided they needed to up the ante and do full human sacrifice.
Oh gosh.
Because they weren't getting the rain.
That's a slippery slope.
Yeah, that was intense. I actually saw the fucking skeletons, the bodies
my gosh.
In the cave.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
There was sacrifice to the rain god Shock, which was in Belize.
Avery did go to Belize.
I did. I forgot about Belize, but yeah. There's some things I would love to talk about about Belize when we get to a later episode.
I didn't really realize, like, with these groups of people, like, they were almost like into kind of like the druid practices.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I guess I didn't put two and two together, because Britain is so formal now.
Yeah, although not in like, Wales, Scotland.
Yeah.
They're less of that.
Well, she makes a sacrifice to this goddess and prays for a sign to lead the warriors in the right direction. It's written that after the sacrifice, she releases a hair from her robes, and they watch which direction the hair goes in, and it heads towards the direction of battle, and they deemed it a good omen. So a lot of imagery that you can find of Boudica, there's usually a hair at her feet.
I think I've seen them.
There's a copy of, she has a chapter in Rejected Princesses, and there's a hare on the cover, and I was like, who's her little rabbit friend? I was like, why does she?
Now you know.
Yes. So the first attack that they do is on, hang on with me, Comula Dunham.
Okay.
Which is modern day Gloucester, England. That area was the center for Roman power. It was the first place that they colonized and then began to take rule over the Britons. So this was their first target. Just hit them right in the heart. So the army attacks with no mercy. They kill hundreds of people. They burn the city to the ground. A little disturbing. I'll just say they do not do great things to the bodies, and they do not display them in great ways.
Yeah.
They did a lot of dismembering, sacrificing of people. They were sacrificing to Andraste as a thank you for a successful battle.
Yeah. For showing favor.
Yes. They march on Roman Londinium, which obviously is modern day London. They destroy and burn that city as well. They destroy Roman temples, statues, trying to wipe out as much Roman imagery that is on their land. They decided they would take no prisoners and they would take no spoils. They were just on a rampage. Yeah. Working their way from place to place, they came to a final battle. Boudica is in a chariot, and she's calling for her people once again to fight. One rendition said that she had her daughters in the chariot too, and was saying, like, look at my daughters and what the Romans have done to them. They are not human for what. And all the representation to her daughters looked really young. They were little.
That's really upset. I mean, not that it matters how old they were, but there is something much more upsetting about.
Yes. And she calls people to fight. She rallies everybody. Everybody's ready to go. They've been traveling so much at this point, the Romans are now starting to get their army together. And one thing the Romans knew how to do was fight. And they were really good at tactical fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Boudica's army knew how to fight too, but they were more kind of shoot from the hip. And they were not as coordinated as the Romans. In this particular battle, the Romans drew the Britons into sort of like a narrow enclosure and almost like a funnel. And even though the Romans were outnumbered, because of the way the battle was positioned, they were able to tactically beat her army because they were just on the flanks and, shooting arrows. They were able to take people one by one in the front. They were very coordinated. Two different accounts are written, as I'd mentioned before. Tacitus said that Boudica, instead of becoming a slave or brutalized again, she poisoned herself and her daughters. Cassius Dio's account said that she fell ill and died after the battle. So it's unknown of which account is true. There was one account that was not either of these two writers that said she died of shock.
Okay, that's not true.
That is so stupid. I was like, okay, this amazing woman who's done all of these things dies of a swoon.
No, I mean, shock is a legit medical problem, right? I went into shock when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Your body shuts down and you're no longer capable of regular human reactions. And if you stay in shock for too long, your body shuts down and you die.
You could die from it?
Yeah, you can. But it's like if you get a really horrific traumatic wound Like, let's say you got into a really terrible car accident
Mm-hmm.
and you have a piece of glass in your throat and you see it and you just go into shock. And you are no longer there. Like, you're not aware of what's happening. And you may not actually die from the wound. You can die from that shock because your body, all of your systems have shut down and only are taking care of the one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you spend a long enough time in that state, you'll die. But yeah, I went into shock when I was 18 months old.
Oh, gosh.
I fell out of a high chair.
Was that the arm?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fell out of a sassy seat that was hooked to the counter.
And your arm was like bad.
Yeah, I tore all of the muscles and ligaments apart and broke all the bones.
Oh
and so I had to be in traction for 6 weeks. But when it first happened, I fell out, hit the ground. Imagine a baby hitting the ground, right? They cry.
Yeah.
I did not cry. My mom like heard the thump and like turned around and was like, "Oh, baby, poor baby," and like picked me up and was like holding me and patting me, and I wasn't crying.
Oh, no.
And so she was like, "I guess it didn't hurt very much," and like put me in the
oh, God.
put me in the chair again, and like went back to cooking and was like, "This is weird. That baby should have cried." Like
something's not
kept
right.
looking at me and my eyes were like glazed over and it was like I wasn't there anymore. And she said that my color started to change. Like, it was clear that my blood was no longer pumping the regular way. And then she looked at my arm.
Oh.
And it was this twisted, mangled like mess. And it was just hanging there. Like it was no longer attached basically on the inside.
Oh.
And so then she brought me into the hospital. And of course, the very first thing that happened was they thought my mom had beaten me. So she rushes me to the hospital. The nurses and doctors take me into this room. And then the sheriff shows up and takes her into a separate room.
Oh, gosh.
It was a whole thing.
Oh.
And then I got put in traction for 6 weeks. And her very best friend in the world had been in a horrific car accident like 4 days before. And she was also in traction for
so
her
you had
leg.
a roommate.
So together we were in the room. I was in my arm cast. And traction, if you're not sure what that is, it's like you
can't move.
You're in a rope and pulley system, and you are not allowed to move. I just want to imagine a toddler being told not to move for 6 weeks. Anyway, I got out of that, had to relearn how to crawl, had to relearn how to walk. And I was doing all of that with a cast on. And then when the cast came off, I was like imbalanced.
Oh, God.
So I was like a little ogre child. But that's how come I know anything about shock.
Well, I'm wondering, like, just this kind of fleeted through my mind because her daughters were there and she's seeing everybody losing. Like, what if her children were killed? And she just...
If they were murdered and like she was injured, that's enough to put your body in shock.
That's kind of crossed my mind.
And you can die of shock because it's like all your systems shut down. So
that did cross my mind. Even though the Romans won, they ruled for a bit longer. The revolt, though, put a huge dent on the Roman hold on Britain, and it's a hold they eventually would lose. Boudica is now a symbol for the Britons, and her fight is honored with this massive, beautiful statue, which is on Westminster Bridge.
Ooh.
It's this huge bronze statue, and it's a chariot with horses in front of it. And Boudica is like right in the middle, and she's got her arms like outstretched, and she's got like a spear in her hand. And she's just got this look of like anger on her face. Fury. And like the wind's going through her hair and her robes are like in the wind and her daughters are at her feet, like holding on to her and like looking at her. And she just looks like she's saying like, bring it kind of thing. The research that was done between these two writers, they were like at a revolutionary point where there was like more freedom of speech going on, I guess. And so bringing her story back was important to both of them because she had just been written off for so long. A lot of this information, I guess, came from like spoken history and some writings that had survived. And so I think Tacitus wrote in Latin and the other one wrote in Greek. So it's still, I hope a lot of the story got through truly. But it is a little short. I'm sorry, but it is just like she was just lost to history.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, like, do you know why her story was erased? Like, what was the social...
The Romans were trying to still maintain a hold.
So they were trying to, like, remove the heroes.
Yes. Especially the fact that a woman was leading this army, which has happened before.
Yes, we've seen.
And actually the same thing happened to Hypatia. Hypatia was almost erased. And I really like that she's still there, and like Britain has now honored her more and more because she's a figure to them of the strength of their people and like what they were capable of and fighting back against oppression. But it's like, also, you guys are kind of oppressors too. So
not kind of. They are
You are full-on oppressors.
The world's best colonizers. If that was a trophy, they would win. They've colonized land on every continent.
Every
continent.
much.
I think yeah, because they even had spots in Antarctica, I think.
Jesus.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure. You can correct me though. I won't feel weird about it. If you're like, no, that's not true. It's only most of them.
Well, I really enjoyed Boudica's story. And that was also another reason I was like kind of hesitant to talk about her, because there's so little out there. Mm-hmm. And then too, like everything I found said the same thing.
Yes.
Like over and over and over. So I want to say a big shout out to Professor Caitlin Gillespie. I did listen to a podcast that she was on called The Ancients, and it's hosted by Tristan Hughes. It's done very well.
Oh, cool.
So if you like historical podcasts, Tristan also has a lovely British accent.
Oh, I love a good British accent.
The audio quality is fantastic. I'll just say that.
Good.
She's really, really knowledgeable. She goes through on the podcast too, how she did a lot of research on the archaeological stuff that they found. Like I was saying, the things that were buried, and it helped her kind of piece together a timeline of what the Iceni people were like and what their structure was, and to find money with, made of silver, that they were a prosperous community. They weren't, a lot of imagery kind of portrays them almost like kind of like Vikings. They were very, warrior-like, but they were also very smart. They were a society.
Yeah.
Also, I went to historicuk.com for info, and another boost for Professor Caitlin Gillespie's book. It's called Boudica, Warrior Woman of Roman Britain.
Great. Love it. It does remind me very much of what I experienced I went to Zunantanich, which is an ancient Mayan ruins in Belize. And while we were there, we just happened to be there while there were archaeology students there and professors from universities from the UK and the United States. And the guy that we were with, this guy named Jorge, shout out to Jorge, love him. He had been part of excavation crews on previous digs. And so he knew a lot of the people who were there, because there are a lot of locals who help with the excavations.
Oh, okay.
And so we had gotten caught in this terrible rainstorm because it was rainy season. So it was like fucking dumping on us. And we were underneath a tent, like over a grave. Wild. Like a freshly dug grave. And after the rainstorm was over, we were like walking into the big field area, and he saw a friend of his, and he starts talking to him, and he was like, what are you guys excavating? And the guy was like, oh, it's really cool. And he was like, can these two come see it? And he was like, yeah, I think so. And then we got to go under the tent of these archaeology students. There was this one woman, I wish I knew her name. She's a PhD student at Texas A&M. And then there were some undergrads who were taking all of the notes and drawings. And the spot that they were in, the dig that they had done, this girl had found 2 previously undiscovered bodies.
Ooh.
And it was interesting because traditionally this is a temple area that we were in. And so the people who are buried in this area are nobles, or were nobles, right? And they were buried with treasures. So there's always like cool pottery and gold and whatever. And in this particular dig and in this particular grave, there was no treasure. And it was the two bodies were put in the shape of a cross. That there was one going one direction on the bottom and the other going the other direction on top. And the one on top was what appeared to be more than likely a fully grown female person. And then underneath was a baby, an infant. So the bones were, and that was the one that we were watching them uncover. And so like little bits at a time, we're seeing like these tiny little bones.
Oh my gosh.
Of this baby. And she said that like her entire PhD work is on the class system within the Mayan culture. And this was for her further proof to her own research that while there were nobles that were obviously buried in these temples, there are also what she believes are probably servants to the nobles who were like considered close family friends or whatever. So they have the dignity of being allowed to be buried on the temple grounds, but they don't get the full burial rights because they don't have the riches and whatever, and they're not buried with all of that stuff. And it's just it was really fascinating to hear her talk about like how to interpret things now without trying to put our current biases on them. But she was also like, a lot of the history and archaeology has been written by men, white men in particular, and they are not taking into consideration that there were potentially like multitude of ways to read a situation. It was just fucking fascinating and just cool to see. Almost every archaeology student under that tent was a woman, which was also really cool. And I was just really like
in awe.
Yeah, and I was like, I wish I'd just taken down her name so I could like interview her for the show because her work sounds really fascinating. She was really interested in like class structures in ancient Mayan society.
Well, it is kind of sad that they did have to bury so much of their things, but also they learned so much when it resurfaced.
Yes. I mean, so the cave that we were in where I saw the bodies, which was fucking wild too, is this really big cave. It's called the ATM cave, which can't remember what the full name is. It's like Aktun. Oh gosh, I'm going to get it wrong, so I'm just not even going to try. But the ATM cave, if you Google it, you'll find it. And it's this cave that these archaeologists back in, I think, the 80s had gone deep in to explore, and they found like, holy shit, this was a sacrifice area.
How many bodies do you think were in there?
Well, there are 13.
Okay.
There are 13 that they discovered. And so in the course of this discovery, they found these bodies, and sometime in the 80s, they decided to have this become a tourist area, like where tourists could come in, but they only wanted 30 guides to be like certified to do this. So like, for instance, our friend Jorge, he could not do ATM because he wasn't even born when they were doing this training.
Oh, wow.
And they've done it one time. So those people are the only people in the country who can lead you into the cave. And so that's pretty wild. But once we were in there and we were in this cave and seeing these, so as you're going through, you're like looking at all of these formations and things like that. But the real like sort of star of the show is at the very end, you climb up into this
and this is room. Climbing, folks.
Yes, it was climbing. And you get into this room. It's basically a room, right? And I knew we were going to see stuff, but like, I was not prepared. I was not prepared to see like the pottery still like in its natural form. Fucking incredible. You could see the individual drawings on the pottery.
Holy shit.
And then you're starting to see like finger bones where they used to do the bloodletting.
Oh yeah.
Like they're just fingers, just a single finger right there. And you're walking in between like just pieces of tape on the ground, and they're like, stay in these little lines. And it's just, by the time we get to the very end, and the very end of it, you sort of peer over this rock, and on the other side is a woman, a full skeleton. That's still it's calcified into the rock, but you see a full woman, and it's just like really sort of like
wild,
takes you back. And like as soon as we were done, I was like, I don't know how I feel about having seen this. Like, I'm glad they left it there and didn't like take it all and put it into a fucking museum.
Yeah,
I think it's cool, but if you think about like your own family members and their graves and where they're at, like, it feels weird to think that like somebody's coming in and staring at their remains and like looking at it and touching it. And
do you feel like you're a little bit in someone's, like, something intense?
Yeah, it felt
happened
a little
there, and
yes,
maybe we shouldn't.
They're like the very first sort of skeleton you find is more than likely a 14-year-old boy, and the archaeologists, historians believe that this was a boy who was probably from like a lower class that they just took, and that was their first human sacrifice, like a full sacrifice. They just killed this little boy to try to get more rain. And like the very end, the body you see, the full woman, they believe that she was like a priestess.
Oh gosh.
And so it was a big deal. Like she was personally sacrificing herself. It was really intense, very incredible. I learned so much. And as somebody who's really interested in history, I felt very like, wow, I'm looking at real history.
Yeah.
In front of me. But also at the same time as somebody who
respects humans.
Yes. And also these are Mayans. They were indigenous people, right? We're not looking at white people's bones. We're not going around digging up white people's cemeteries. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like there was something very exploitative and weird about it that I later on felt very conflicted on. And I was like, I would never go in there again. I would never do that again. And I just feel conflicted. I'm like, I'm glad I had that experience, but I think maybe it shouldn't be an experience.
Well, it sounds like I understand what you're saying, but it sounds like maybe a lesson.
Yeah. Well, for me, for sure. But every day there are hundreds of people going through that cave.
There.
And also caves are incredibly sensitive ecosystems. If you touch, it dies. So everywhere that we were at, everything was already dead, right? Because that gets traversed all the time. But they keep telling you, like, don't touch, don't touch up there, don't touch. And we were with a group of teenage boys and they touched stuff that they weren't supposed to touch. And like, that's another thing is like, it's a fragile ecosystem. We shouldn't be in here. Our oils, our smells, our touch, we're in the water, like we're contaminating it. It just bothered me on so many levels after I was done. And I felt really conflicted about it. But you're talking about this person, Boudica, and I'm like immediately drawing some comparisons in my mind to some of the ways in which we know that they fought and buried their dead and things like that. Things we would not know.
Yeah. If
there were not excavations and archaeologists and things like that. And I think that history, having done a history podcast now for this is our 4th season, it really does make me think harder about the world and the way we treat each other and the way we treat the past.
I've definitely, since this is our 4th season, has learned how much history really does fucking repeat itself.
Yes.
Over and over. Like the amount of research. I don't even know if we could count how many hours that we've done research for this show. And the narrative just like, you're like, again?
Repeated.
Really? Again?
repeated. It's funny because one of the people that I have on my list to do this season, there is a very repetitive thing we're going to talk about that's like almost identical to some of the other ones we've talked about.
Oof.
But that is what it is. It's like, it is history, and history is very cyclical. And that's why I also think it's really interesting and important to be able to draw connections between European history like that and South American history or Central American history, because there is this perception among people who think whites are superior or white history is superior, that it's very fucking similar.
Yeah.
And it's not. There is no superiority here.
I did notice too, like in a couple of things that I've done of with Boudica's story of the public beating. I mean, Hypatia was murdered and quartered in front of people.
Yeah.
And it's like the physical brutality that is towards women and doing it on a public display as like a warning.
Well, and I mean, not to become too didactic here, but like that is a tactic, right? To silence and oppress. And we think of it as this barbaric thing that was done in the past. So long ago, nobody would ever do that. But like lynchings.
Yeah.
We're in the 20th century and sometimes still in the 21st. So we are capable of the same brutality.
Absolutely.
Well, that was a cheery note to end on. Wanted to let you all know that we are, because our schedules are insane now and we have, this different custody arrangement situation that's happening. We are going to reduce our season this year to every other week and probably a shorter season. We haven't entirely decided on exactly what that looks like, but we are going to intersperse stuff with some cool interviews and do some bonus stuff on the Patreon. And so stick with us and we'll keep you informed on all of that.
Well, thanks for joining us again. If you've been here since the beginning,
yes,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
And if you're just joining us, tune into those other seasons. There's some real good stuff.
I feel like we need to do like a I don't know, some kind of note at the beginning of our first season to be like, hey, I know it sounds bad. It gets better and we're on this. But yes, thank you if you've stuck around with us since day one and we appreciate your support. Don't forget you can subscribe to our Patreon and you can buy our merch. And we're also going to be dropping some merch that you can buy directly from us because we've had it for a while and we have tried to set up online stores and there's all kinds of weird shit that is like too much for us to understand. So I will be dropping a form soon that you can fill out and pay for some merch and we will send it out to you. But we're getting our Patreon people hit up first. They're going to get free stuff because they're cool.
For free.
But if you're interested in supporting us and want to buy some merch, we will have that for you very shortly.
And also thank you to Lucas McIntyre still sticking with us and doing our sweet editing.
Yep. And thank you to Jennifer Finch for our amazing and rocking theme music.
All right, folks. Till next time.
Goodbye.